Oh, man. Okay, well, welcome back to the Physics of Faith podcast. This is so different doing it this way for this episode, but, for anybody watching at home, you'll see that we've kind of got a different setup again. We're back in the office.
Back in the office.
Back in the office.
Back in the lab making beats,
Yeah, making beats, listening to the beats with the drums. And we don't have headphones on, so we can't actually... I don't want to have to sit here and explain how this all works to everybody listening.
Science.
Yeah, science. But let's just say the music's going to be added in after the recording. Let's just say that.
I feel quite naked right now, man.
Yeah, it feels really strange.
Yeah.
But did you have anything you wanted to say about the drums we can't hear?
Just spirit needs to be here, That's
right.
That's right. You can always add it later.
This episode is called Ichabod.
Just here in the office, man. Just here in the office.
Now, something else that's strange, other than the way we're recording and the setting.
So everything
is different about this episode. Tommy, welcome to the other side of the Physics of Faith podcast.
Yeah, this is one I don't get to be on these. We're not talking about the Bible, We're actually talking about
yeah, I know, right? I know, right?
I don't know how to talk about anything other than the actual scripture.
I don't know what I talk about when I'm here. Yeah.
See, Brandon, what Tommy and I do is we actually read the scriptures and talk about what's in them, as opposed to just shooting from the hip about everything.
No, that's not how it works. I didn't even know there was this. What is the scriptures you speak of here? Yes. Is that a drum loop? Is that what that is?
That is not what that is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, Tommy, man, I'm glad we're doing this. We wanted to get you on one of these for a while now. So, and I think we're going to do another one here soon as well. So that'll be fun. I mean, obviously, if this goes well, then you'll be on another one.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, if this goes poorly, I might not be on another one.
Well, here's the thing. People are going to get sick of me because I'm going to be on. I'm only on every other one.
Right.
Now that's going to be like 3 or 4 in a row.
My contract only allowed me to do every other episode. So my agent was.
And I'm on all of them because I carry this thing. Let's just be honest.
Because he owns the equipment. So he's got to be here.
And he came up with it. And he basically does all the work.
He does do all the work. He really does do all the work. Yep.
True. I just came to the conclusion, I don't need you guys.
You really don't.
All right.
Yeah.
See you later.
That's right. Yeah. You could just use my office if you want.
That's
yeah.
Right. Thanks, man. Oh, gosh.
So this is how these go. Okay.
This is how these go. Yeah.
Yeah.
We banter and joke for the first 5 to 10 minutes. Then we attempt to approach a topic, and then
we remember that we should probably read a scripture.
Right. Yeah.
And then the drums roll, and that's about it.
That's about it. We're usually just here for the drums.
We really are, man. Yeah.
Oh, but this one here is going to be even more laid back, I think, than normal. We're going to have some discussions about some of our favorite parables that Jesus teaches in the scriptures. Mm-hmm. So, see, there is scripture.
Hey, yeah, we are going to talk about that.
We are going to read some scriptures. So, for those listening at home or watching at home, essentially, I'm going to start us out. I'm going to read a parable, talk a little bit about what I took out of that. These guys are going to comment. And you know what? If you like this type of format, you can do this at home with your friends and family and loved ones. It's what we would sometimes refer to as a Bible study.
As long as you have drums.
As long as you have drums.
And microphones.
And a microphone. You have to record and post every Bible study to YouTube or it didn't happen.
That's right. That's right. I believe the Lord said where 2 or more are gathered with microphone.
That's right.
There am I. Yeah.
There am I. Like and subscribe.
Perfect.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so the parable I'm going to go with here is the parable of the marriage feast. And I totally forgot my computer, and we use my phone to record. So Brandon's going to let me read from his, and so I apologize. This will be in the ESV.
What do you? I can change it. What do you normally do it in?
I do the NASB, but we'll just do ESV.
Okay.
Yeah,
Brandon doesn't know how to go off the NASB.
No, I don't. Yeah, I mean, is that really a Bible? NASB. B. Well, see, that's
B is in Bible. Okay.
Oh, I thought it was Bible.
All right. So the parable of the wedding feast is in Matthew 22. It's verses 1 through 14 if you're following along at home. And I'm just going to read this, and then I'm going to jump into some of the points here. If you guys want Jump in at any point after I finish. That's totally fine too. So if anything pops out to you and you want to say something, go for it. All right. Matthew 22, verse 1. And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry. He sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find.' And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garments. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?' And the man was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" Hand that back to you.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so that's the marriage. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Of course.
Do we really want to talk?
It really highlights your love for people.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
We read this on Christmas morning at my
I
house.
do. You know what? That's my favorite part is when he burns the city.
This is where we light the tree up real bright. Yeah.
Right. So I chose this one here because I don't know, when I was reading it, I felt like there was a lot that I could draw out that could relate to just how we're called to Christ and how people are called to the kingdom, and really our opportunities to choose what we want and if we want to be a part of God's kingdom. So what we see is the king is calling people to the feast, and obviously the king is God. Like in this, that's kind of the parallel there. So he sends out the first time, he sends his servants out, and his servants are like, "Hey, do you want to come to the feast?" Or "You were invited to the feast." So like the invitations were out. These people were supposed to come.
Right.
And they were like, "Yeah, no." And they just kind of went their own ways. So he sends them out a second time. And the second time, everybody was too busy. Well, not everybody. Some of the guys were too busy. They're like, I got things to do at my house. I got things to do at my business. I'm too busy to be a part of the wedding, or to be a part of the kingdom, so to speak. But then there's like an extra set of people. And it was, I like how they, in the NSAB, it says, and then the rest of them. So like there's some that were just like, I'm busy. I got things to do. And then everybody else was like, you know what? We're going to do shameful things to you.
Yeah.
And then murder you.
Yeah.
Because you keep inviting us to this wonderful feast. And like, what a weird response.
Right.
What a such a strange response. And I think this is something that, you guys might be able to attest to, is knowing God, knowing Jesus. It's hard to understand, and knowing what's at stake, it's hard to understand why anybody would reject him. Right. And it's such a weird thing that people would not just reject him, but be violently against any who would talk about him.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is such an extra step. You know what I'm saying? And this is going to sound really weird, but like in modern day senses, the people I think about with this are like, not to name drop here, but like the Patton Oswalts of the world.
Sure. Yeah.
Like people in the comedy realm,
Right.
quote unquote. Yeah, guys got some funny stuff. Don't get me wrong. That like have no problem belittling or talking bad. David Cross, another one.
Sure.
Those of the faith.
Right.
Right. And so it's not even a, you know what, that's not for me. It's a, not only is it not for me, you're an idiot.
Right. It's the poking fun of it.
Right. Exactly. And that's how we deal with it in America. In other countries, it's maybe a little bit more like this verse.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where-
even today.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
I know it's hard for some people to understand this, but this is how people behave. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's wild. It's kind of wild to think about being here in America that anybody would do this, but this is the reality globally is that people die for preaching the gospel.
Oh, 100%.
right.
Yeah.
Here in America, it's more of the shaming. It's more of the we're gonna belittle you as well.
Right. Which is funny, again, like you said, to think that like the message of like if you look at the context of this parable, he's just inviting them to a feast, and it's going to be a nice feast. Like it's a good. He's killed his calves and it's ready to go, and like it's going to be a real humdinger,
Yeah.
And that's their response, right? Which seems kind of silly, but when you put it in the context of sharing the gospel, there are so many people who like. You're a Christian? Oh, that's stupid. Like, it's not like, it's not for me. It's like, it goes to that extreme. And so, it's not as far of a stretch as you think when you actually begin to apply it, for sure.
I mean, and this isn't the only place in the Bible where it touches on this, because I think it's in, was it Mark something? It says, you will be hated before my name.
Right.
I don't know the whole verse, and I don't know chapter and verse, but I know it, it says in the, you will be hated for my name. I mean, and that's strong.
Right. That's
you
very
will
strong.
be hated for loving me. And that says something,
Yeah, hate is a strong word.
It is.
So maybe they really, really, really don't like us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We don't use hate in my room. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you're exactly right. It's crazy. It also reminds me too of like I grew up in the 90s. I think you guys were pretty close to that too. Like apathy was a huge thing in the 90s. Like to
For
be
sure.
cool, you had to not care about things.
For sure.
Yeah.
And like I still see it today, but not maybe in a different light with younger people,
Yeah.
where it's like if you show excitement for something, oh you're goofy, you're an idiot, you're
Right.
stupid, you got to play it cool, you got to be straight laced, or straight faced, one of the two. And like that's what this kind of reminds me of. Like, oh, you're excited about God? Well, there must be something mentally wrong with you then.
Right.
Right. And like, that's the type of thing that we, and we like to say, not us, but people in America like to say that Christians are persecuted here. I think that's a very liberal use of the word,
Yeah.
Contextually with the rest of the world, 100%.
It's not even close in comparison.
Yeah.
but we're definitely ridiculed.
Sure.
We're definitely belittled. But what I find interesting is that typically, so I've known, you guys might be able to speak to this as well. I've known people that had no problem making blanket statements about Christians.
Right.
But if they had a relationship with you and they found out you were a Christian, they were suddenly a lot more reasonable about it.
100%.
Yeah.
Right.
And they also
Yeah.
get mad when you make blanket statements about other things. Like that, you're not allowed to make blanket statements about these type of people or these type of people or these type.
Right.
But Christians, it's okay.
Yeah. You can't generalize unless it's about Christians in general.
Well, it's like the episodes making fun of Christianity are the ones that don't get canceled.
Right. Oh, 100%.
like,
Yeah. That don't receive death threats and
That's not true either, because like I know I've seen, well, I'm not gonna say I know for a fact, but like I read like the intro to a book written by Richard Dawkins. And one of his arguments is like, if you could see the mail I get from quote unquote Christians,
Yeah.
you would also question
Sure.
why I would want to believe in this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So like there's times where Christians, for whatever reason, believe they are the righteous judgment of God.
Right.
And
Boondock Saints.
wow. Okay. I never thought we'd have a Boondock Saints reference.
I'll bring it in for you guys. Don't you worry. I'm not here for the scriptures, just the pop culture references.
All right. That's great. Yeah. All right. But here's the next part about this. And I want to be like, I just really compared these people to a lot of actual people that are out there.
Sure.
Some names. But God's response, the king's response, is pretty heavy.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, now in his defense, they killed his servants in the story, right? So, but he comes back and he's like, you know what? I'm going to destroy, he destroys everyone for murdering and then burns their cities to the ground. Basically destroys everything about their lives.
Real metal parable. Yeah.
It's very metal. I love it when we get a good metal Bible verse. We got to start that Jesus metal band.
That's man. I can hear drop C tuning right now.
So I wanted to start a metal band that covers only Michael W. Smith songs and call it Rock It Down.
Please, let's do it.
Let's do that.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
he burns everything. I mean, he doesn't just say like, he burns it all.
He lays waste, basically. And I think what this is telling us ultimately is, the judgment of God can be swift and brutal.
Yeah.
Now, does he do this to everyone in this parable? No, he does this specifically. It's almost as if there's a heavier hand for those who had violence against a servant.
Well, yeah, it doesn't actually say anything. I mean, right off the bat, at least, it doesn't say anything about the people who are like, I'm busy.
Yeah, you've kind of got the people who chose to go their own way. Now, it says they destroyed their cities.
Right.
So were those people in those cities?
Right. I mean, when we know kind of where this is going.
This is going, yeah.
Right.
But you kind of see like there are people who basically chose not to go.
Right.
And then those who acted in violence against it, and those people were specifically called out as being destroyed.
Right.
Right.
And swiftly dealt with.
Yeah, because you think about it, they're not only do they reject the gospel, not only do they reject the king,
right,
but by killing those people, they are keeping it so that other people can't see the king as well.
Sure.
If you kill the messenger, nobody else can get the message.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an insult.
Yeah, it's an affront to the king who sent the messenger. Yeah.
Right.
God forbid they just shave their beards halfway off like they did in David's time.
Man, David had a problem with that. Yeah.
Okay. So after God deals with these violent people, he sends them out for a third time. And he says, look, those people weren't worthy for this feast. So I'm going to send you out, and I want you to just go down the main road and get anyone you can find that's willing to come. Right? And in this moment, you do kind of see, and I'm not going to say specifically who's who in this, but you are kind of seeing a conversation here about the people of God, the Israelites,
right,
and that first covenant,
right,
and then kind of opening up to this new covenant that allows anyone to come in.
Right. You totally get the sense of the Gentiles.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So they start traveling the road and they invite people. And then what's interesting about this too is they invite both good and bad people.
Right. I like that it says that.
And both good and bad people show up.
Yeah. Oh, right. Crud.
Right. Yeah.
Now here's what I like about that is this is really a great illustration of the acceptance of God, right? So I think sometimes Christianity gets a bad name for not being accepting, but in reality, God will accept anyone, right? Now, there's going to be more to that story as we kind of go down, but I think it's important, like, God doesn't reject you. You reject him. Right? So everybody was welcome. So, and this is something where we have to understand as Christians too. We're not owed anything special just because, Brandon and I have shared our testimonies on here a little bit. I'd never walked away from the faith.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty good kid, did all the right things. Right. I'm the second brother in the prodigal son story. Brandon had a different experience. Right. I used to get so mad when I was younger when somebody would come back from their backsliding. Not because I wasn't mad that they came back. I was obviously I was glad that they got out of those ways and they came back to the Lord. But what would make me mad was the level of honor that was shown to them. Just like in the parable of the two the prodigal son and the brother.
Yeah.
And I would get so upset about that. And I think that's because they would be given these seats of honor. They would be given these opportunities to speak. They would
like
do all
becoming
these
a
things.
pastor and
Right.
Yeah.
I'm right. And I'm over here like, look, I went to Bible college. I'm doing all the things. I'm doing, and you're like, you won't, like, everybody always seems so guarded. And maybe the problem was me. So
well, we just discovered something here, haven't we?
Well, he did pick the verse where everyone's burned and murdered. So yeah,
it's like every time I got a chance to be, I was like, "You're all gonna die."
Like, why does he keep picking these metal verses?
But like there was this kind of hesitation.
Sure,
everybody treated me with kid gloves. It would seem.
Sure,
But like this guy was exciting because he, you know, and like I can't remember the verse reference, but there's that, you know, like he who's forgiven more tends to have a little bit more joy. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah.
And so you like that was obvious in their lives.
Sure.
Right. But there was a part of me that was envious about that because it was like, well, I've been the faithful one.
Right.
You know, so I think that's an important thing for us to remember. It's not everybody that shows up in the kingdom of heaven isn't going to have a squeaky clean track record.
Right. Right.
But there are brothers and sisters, and we should celebrate and rejoice in the fact that God has invited everyone.
Right.
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 But what happens next? So they all show up. They're all at the feast, and the king comes out, and he's like, "All right, let's walk around, meet the guests. We're going to do some mingling, right?" He's walking around, and he finds a guy who didn't wear the correct robes.
Right.
Right. And he's like, "Why aren't you wearing these robes? Like, why didn't you dress up? Why didn't you dress appropriately for the occasion?"
Right.
And the guy had no rebuttal. He didn't say anything.
Right.
It says he was rendered speechless.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the king is calling him out. When the king, who just laid to waste all of his enemies, is saying to you, "Why are you not doing what's appropriate?"
Right.
All of your excuses fall away.
Right.
Right. Now, we don't know. The parable doesn't tell us why
Right.
he didn't do this, but this is where he was accepted, but he couldn't be included. And I've said this on our podcast before, but inclusion requires conformity.
100%. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what you're being included into. If you don't get with the program, then you are by default outside of the program. Right. And so in this instance, this is what this is ultimately kind of saying is if you're going to be a part of the kingdom, if you're going to come to the wedding feast,
Right.
you need to act like it's a wedding feast.
Right.
You need to act like you're in the kingdom of heaven. Now,
Right.
I'm not talking about works-based righteousness, but I am talking about committing your life to Christ, you know, working through your salvation, working through your sanctification,
Right.
and setting aside that sin that entangles you, right? So just because you were invited and accepted doesn't mean you get to bring everything you want with you.
Right. Well, I think it shows a total lack of sincerity on his part. You know what I mean?
does,
Like,
yeah.
so the part of the reason why, I mean, I think a lot of people, they hear that and they jump and they're like, "Oh, the poor guy. Well, what if he was too poor to afford him?" Like, you know, like they make, I think every person will make an excuse for the guy, right? Because we've all made those excuses. Like, well, maybe he was the last one and he didn't have time, you know, like whatever. But he wasn't really, truly, genuinely sincere about it. Like, so I just, let's put that into faith. Like, there's a lot of people who say like, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian," but yet they don't sincerely try to live a Christian life.
Right.
You know, and I think that like this is that guy. This is the guy who's like, "Yeah, I'm showing up on Sundays, but I'm not really trying to be what I'm called to be."
Right.
You know, like I'm not, like you said, that we talk about this in church, like our righteousness does not come from us. It comes from the Lord. Like that's where our righteousness is. And so like the only way we're righteous is when we live in the Lord, like in the Spirit. And so like, this is a guy who like says, "I know Jesus," but Jesus is like, "I don't know you." You know, this is that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It's the guy who wants the reward.
Right.
He wants the benefits of being in the kingdom. He wants the eternal life. He wants
Right.
all of those things. He wants the free meal.
Right.
But he doesn't want to do what's required to get it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you can make excuses for him, but like if the dude was really genuinely serious and he knows, and here's the thing, like he clearly knew he was wrong, right? I mean, like that's he's left speechless. So he's like,
Right.
"Oh shoot, like you caught me." Yeah. Like, so he knew the expectation and he chose in light of the expectation to not follow it. And I think that's, you know, we got to be careful here because a lot of people want to give this guy grace and like, "Well, your God is so judgmental. I mean, he just burned some cities down and now he's kicking this poor guy out." Well, no, this guy showed him disrespect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he is judgmental.
For sure.
Yeah, he is.
Right.
He is the judge.
He gets to be. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Has anybody complained about judges being judgmental?
Right.
No, that's their job.
Exactly.
Well, some people are complaining
Well,
about it, but most of them are getting sentenced, and that's why.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens here. Though, is people who want to defend this guy, and like, look, he didn't kill the man. Like, now he bound him and tossed him out into the night. Right. Where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. Obviously, where this guy's going is not a good time.
Right.
Right. So you want to feel bad for the guy, you want to defend the guy, but you want to defend the guy because you want to justify not fitting the right mold.
Right.
And, like, I get how that can sound, especially in our day and age. There's been so many, we've been so propagandized about bucking against the system and like not conforming to the majority, and and like based on the idea that Christian conservatives are the majority, right? And they always tie those two together,
right?
And so, like, well, if he doesn't want to be like that, then like, why do you gotta, like, that's why I can't accept it. Here's it: just because you don't like it, just because you don't want it, doesn't make it not the truth,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So
and look, he was inviting him to his feast.
Right.
The king was inviting him to his feast. So the king kind of gets to set his own rules.
100%.
If you go over to somebody's house, you don't. If let's say you're helping him put the dishes away, and you put the plates where the cups go, and you don't get to say, hey, I want to put the cups here, not the dishes here. Like, no, this is my house. I set the rules. And I think that is, kind of going back to what you're saying, Brandon, is he did the very bare minimum to get there. He was just like, all right, I'll show up. But
what is he wearing?
Yeah, it wasn't important enough to do the really, and because the king doesn't ask a whole lot. He says, show up and dress in the right garments. And so he didn't ask him to bring anything. He didn't ask him to give a toast. He didn't ask him to work. Just show up and be like you want to be here, or be prepared. And the thing about it is, this isn't that, if you take this into real life, if you take this into those that reject God, like there's no give.
Right.
Like there's no, well, all right, just sit in the back. It's you get completely thrown out.
Yeah.
Well, and the difference between this guy is, okay, all the good and the bad, right? We know they're there. And I actually looked it up while you were talking. Like, it doesn't, like, the Bible, like the Greek actually is wicked. Like the word, it says wicked. So these are people who've done some bad stuff.
Yeah.
They're there. Like, and that, I think that goes back to kind of what you were saying, is like, not everybody's going to be squeaky clean in the kingdom of God.
Right.
But everybody will have Jesus as a covering, right? Jesus is the robe, right? This is the robe that we're wearing, is Christ. And that's what makes us acceptable in the eyes of God, is Christ. Okay. So let's put this into this context. Here's a dude who does not have Jesus. He's not, he could be he could be a great guy for all we know,
right?
But he's not wearing, I know this sounds weird, but like, he's not wearing Christ. Like, he's not wearing, so he's explicitly sinning, and sin can't be in heaven.
You know what he is he's the deconstructed
100%,
guy who's like, you know what? Jesus is about love, and I just can't put on the Jesus that isn't about love.
Right. Or the Jesus that would say sin is sin.
Right. So I'm going to dress in my Jesus.
Right. This is who he is.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Which, as it turns out, is not the right garment to wear to the feast.
And it's not going to get you in.
Right. And it's not going to get you in. Right. And so I think, like, if we're looking at this from that perspective, this is a guy who clearly has we'll just say unrepented sin. Just call it kind of just what it is. He's got unrepented sin in his life, and sin can't exist in the presence of God.
No.
So that's not heaven. And, so I think that's why, like I said, I love this. I'm glad you picked this one, even though it is pretty metal and brutal. It's so brutal.
Not even though, but because it
is brutal. Yeah, man, this has got some great song lyrics behind it, I'm sure. But like, I like this idea, because I think even when you first read it, even in my heart, I was like, that poor guy. But now as we talk about it more, you're like, dude's an idiot. Like you kind of start to lose you're like, oh, you don't feel sorry for a guy who didn't try.
Well, and you also have to remember that this wasn't written in 2023.
Right.
This is this isn't even when you think about it, this probably wasn't a New Testament happening. This probably happened even before Jesus was. I mean, as you think it, this wasn't in that time. And so the rules and the expectations and the traditions and weddings and feasts and banquets completely different than what we do now.
Absolutely.
But the norms were explicit, and I think that's kind of the point of this. Is like the standards for heaven are explicit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of wraps this one. I think that the big things for me on this, if I just highlight them again real quick, God accepts everyone, but only, many are called, few are chosen. That's based on whether or not they choose inclusion with Christ. God's judgment is swift and it is real and it will happen. And ultimately, just because you can choose not to go to the feast doesn't mean you're free of the consequence
100%
of not going.
Right.
So God gives you the right to choose not to be there.
Yeah.
But that means you are in the dark.
Right.
So those were the things that stood out to me. And that was,
and please don't murder or shame
yeah, please
God's servants, because oh Lord.
Well, because that's us, and I don't want to be murdered or shamed.
Yeah, because I don't want to be in that city when that happens. I don't want to be collateral damage.
That's too funny. Yeah.
Oh goodness. All right. So Tommy,
me next.
We're gonna go head down to you and go ahead.
Yeah. So the parable that I chose is in Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14, and so this is it'd be called a couple different things. So I'm reading in the NIV. This is what I grew up with, so spare me forgiveness.
That's good.
And so in this, it calls it the parable of the bags of gold. Some places you hear it called the talents. Several different translations call them different things, but the story is the same. So it begins, chapter 25 begins in verse 14. It says, "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.' The man with 2 bags of gold also came. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.' Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. 'Master,' he said, 'I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you.' His master replied, 'You wicked, lazy servant.'" This kind of ends the same way as Tim's all about love today.
Man, you guys picked some brutal ones.
His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the banker so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless service outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." That is literally how it's almost like the same guy told these two stories.
It's crazy.
Really,
yeah. It's crazy.
This guy that was all about love keeps talking about weeping and gnashing.
Throwing people out where weeping and gnashing.
Someone's going to need a dentist after any of this.
Yeah, so there's several things that I like. This is kind of the parable that I think about the most often, and the main reason is kind of later on. But we'll start kind of like you said, Tim. Kind of try to go through it, verse by verse. But it starts with, obviously you have a man who has fairly decent wealth. He's got gold to share, and he has at least 3 servants. And so he gives one of them 5, one of them 2, and one of them 1. And it says each according to his ability. And I think that, you hear often, I think we say a lot that God's not going to give you more than you can handle, which is not in the Bible. That's not a biblical verse. And so, and this is probably where a lot of people get that from. God's not going to, he gave what is according to their ability.
Right.
And so in reality, that's not really true. God does give you more than you can handle, and you have to let God take care of the rest.
Sure.
It's not, it's not all you that does the work. It's God. And so, the one thing that I like when the version that calls it talents, obviously our word for talent is different than what a talent was back then.
Right.
Obviously now we think of a talent as a gift, a skill, or something that you're good at. Obviously back then it was as a type of currency, or an amount of currency. But I like it when it calls talent because it's easier to recognize and correlate to what this is really talking about, is that he's talking about God, each one gives us gifts.
Right.
Each one gives us talents. He gives us, the fruits that he gives each according to their ability. Right. And I think that's the other thing that we have to make sure that we remember, is that God also gives us the ability too. He gives, he gives those that are capable for 5, he gives them 5. He gives them 2, and so on and so forth. And so, he goes off, and the man that had 5 bags and the man that had 2 bags, they put them to work, and they doubled doubled the man's investment.
Right.
And this is really my favorite part of this parable. This is really why I like this parable. So after the man that created or earned 5 bags of gold, and the man that earned 2 bags of gold, the master said the exact same thing.
Right.
Yes.
So, he says to the guy that earned 5, the master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." And that's verse 21. In verse 23, he's talking to the guy that had 2. His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." And, in today's culture, we so often we relate worth to what people are capable of doing and what people doing. You look at the Billy Grahams and the Rick Warrens, and like, oh, there's so much, they're going to get such a nice seat in heaven, as opposed to me. I'm just going to get, I've been working at my little church here for whatever. But according to the master, they get the same reward. Yeah. Because they did what they could do with what they were given.
Right.
And I think that is the key, is that, to me, when we're relating this to our lives, each one of us is given certain gifts by God, some different than the others and some more than the others. And our job is to do what God has given us and to put it to work, and to double it, to spread the gospel, to spread Jesus Christ's name.
Right.
And so if you do what you're supposed to do with what God has given you, God tells you, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and you share in the master's happiness.
Right.
There's no difference in what the guy that had 5 and the guy that had 2.
Right. And I think there's part of this too, which is kind of cool, is there's also kind of like a underlying commentary on like the danger of comparison, right? Like, he starts the whole thing off by saying they were given. So the one who was given 5, the one who was given 2, they were all given according to their ability, right? So I think there's a danger where when you look at a Billy Graham and you say, oh man, like a pastor, I'll just put myself in that position. Like, you look at that, you say, oh man, I wish I had a church like Rick Warren's.
Yeah.
No, you don't. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, like, and maybe there are some people out there who do, and maybe that's because that's their talent level.
Yeah.
But like, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I think that's the thing, is a lot of us, we look at success in numerical worldly terms, but that's not how this scripture sets up success. Success is doing what you have been given, doing the best with what you've been given. And so I think that there's a really cool kind of, like you just said, it's the same reward, even though the one brought in 3 less, well, technically what he doubled it, so 4, so that's, well, doing the math here, 6. I'm sorry, I had to do, not my strong suit. He brought in 6 less talents, but yet he still gets the same reward. Why? Because he wasn't about the comparison, he was about the work. And so I love how that starts off.
It's interesting too when he talks to the servant who buried the gold. He basically says it would have been better if you had put this in the bank and earned interest off it.
Right. Yeah.
Now that's going to be like a 0.001% interest on one piece of gold.
Right.
Right. But yet he would have accepted that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 100%. Yeah.
He's actually losing purchasing power because he's not keeping up with inflation.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Spoken like a real investor over here.
Tell us what you do for a living.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, I love that. It's because it's not about doing the most; it's about doing what you were called to do.
Right.
And I think that's something that, like, so when I hear this, when I think about the talents or what's given to them, I don't think about it in a sense of, although I think it was an acceptable analogy, but like sometimes I think about this in the concept of he gave them a calling.
Sure. Sure.
One of the things you notice is that they all returned what they were given, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't get these like enormous sums, or
Right.
It was all identical to what they were given.
Right.
So I think when I try to apply that to my life, like I could, okay, I know this is gonna sound, I could totally do Rick Warren's church, right? I could totally do that, right? Sure. If you're hearing me and you're probably laughing at that right now, and that's totally fine. I totally get it, right? But I know that I'm capable of all things, and I'm capable in any situation God puts me in, right?
Sure.
I could do that. That's not necessarily what I was called to, though.
100%.
There are a lot of people who could do that. Just because somebody isn't doing something doesn't mean they're not capable of it.
Right.
But is it what you were called to? Right. And you have to be willing to say, I'm okay getting the 2 talents.
100%.
I'm okay doing this because this is what God needs from me. You and I knew this guy who we used to work with him at a retail store, and we've talked about it before. He was a pastor, and then he worked with us, and then he was a pastor.
Right.
And at one of the churches he was at, he told us these stories. He was like, man, that church things did not go well. He was a pastor of a church. He was like,
right, I remember this.
Well.
Yeah.
He goes, but that's where Mercy Me met.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And they met at his church, and like the 2 founding members were introduced there.
And the joke was that we told him he created that.
Yeah.
That he created Mercy Me.
Like, you're responsible for Mercy Me.
Man, I can't believe you. Would you remember when you started Mercy Me? Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, obviously he didn't take credit for it.
No, he didn't.
But he sincerely said to me one time, he was like, if me being involved in this church, if me pastoring this church and starting this church, had any part to play in the ministry that Mercy Me became.
Right.
He goes, then all of the pain of it, all of the suffering of it, all of the issues of it was worth it. Because God took the one little thing and made it something much bigger. Right. He was content to say, I played my part. I didn't have to be Mr. 5 talents. I didn't have to be Mr. 2 talents. He was okay getting the return of his investment at the 0.001% with the bank. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And because he did what God called him to do.
Right.
Oftentimes we are afraid, like this last guy, because we're afraid we're not going to get the return that we think
100%.
God wants.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But we don't know the return that God wants us to get.
Right.
We just know the calling that he's given us.
Right.
And so as it goes on here, he says the one that he gave one, he hid it. And I think that it's important to remember, and I hadn't thought about this until I was kind of going back through this and preparing for this. When they return back the
He
bags,
prepares, man, and I want you to take notes.
Good.
Brandon.
Yeah.
Okay.
when they return back, when the master comes back and they return, they're saying to him, here is what I did with what you gave me. Because when you think about it, the master didn't give, it wasn't their gold. It wasn't the servant. He didn't give them that gold. This is yours now.
Right.
It was basically, he was leaving and he wanted them to watch over it, and so this basically they said, here's what I have done with what you gave me. And you had this one guy that not only did he not do anything, he hid it.
Right.
And that was really, reading back through that, it's kind of hard to think about, because when you think about this, if we're not using what God has created us to do, if we're not using our gifts, we're literally hiding what He gave us.
Yeah.
And when you and it's really powerful to think that the gifts that God gave you, the talents, the gifts, the whatever it is, if you think of those as God's for you to use, it really changes things. Because you think about, wow, I am not doing with God what God gave me. You know, we kind of think, oh yeah, this is, whether it be music or whether it be preaching or whether it be administration or all of those things. Like, yeah, I'm good at that, but I don't really want to do that with it.
Right.
But when you think about it, like, that is God's gift that He gave you for that.
Well, and just to take it a step further, like, think about it this way. Like, yeah, okay, so there's a lot of people, we'll say, out there who are probably listening or watching or doing whatever, and they're like, oh man, I don't think I'm doing anything for God. The specific of that, though, is that God gave them those talents, not for their sake, like you said, but for the sake of growing, let's just say, God's kingdom.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, and so I think there's a flip side to this too, that let's take it a step further. There are some people who aren't using their gifts for God's kingdom, but they're using God's gifts for themselves. And let me explain what I mean by that. Like, I think a really good example of this in my personal life was, like, I've been gifted with I grew up in a musical family. I love music. I have a pretty good ear. And so music has always been a part of my life. And I think I have a gift. I can play almost any instrument. I just can kind of, it's just a kind of little skill I have. And, I was telling Tim, and I think we might even talked about this at one point in time on the podcast, but like, there was a point in time, as we know, I was in a pretty awesome rock band and, pretty cool, cool dude. No, but there's a time when
humble too.
I'm so humble, so humble. Key to success is humility. But so I was in this band and it was getting bigger and we were on a label and we were touring and it was all this stuff. And, I got called into ministry and I got called, my life went a completely different way and I left all of that. And people ask me all the time, like, are you going to start another band? Are you going to get in another band? And like, Tim and I were talking and I was like, there's a part of me now that's like, that was God's gift to me and I was using it to propel my own agenda, my name, my fame, and I think there's people who hide their talents, but then there's also people who take God's talents and then invest them in ways to manipulate the system for themselves, right? So it's like, for example, like, let's give a hypothetical, like, you're really good at making money or you're really good at X, Y, and Z, but you don't use that to help God's kingdom. You use that to help yourself. Like, there are people out there that say, well, I am using God's talent, yeah, but not to build the kingdom. And I think that that's the difference between your parable and where people are in their lives, is that a lot of times we take what God has given us, we don't use it to grow God's kingdom, we use it to grow ourselves. But we mistakenly think, well, yeah, God, I used your gift. You gave me the ability to speak, but I didn't speak on your behalf, or to grow your kingdom. I used it to become X, Y, and Z, and I think you both probably can speak to that because you have to walk that fine line of like, how do I use my gift and for God's kingdom, but also how do I make, I'm spoiled in the aspect of having a pastor, right? So this is my job. You guys have to walk that back and forth of like, I have a job and I have a career, but then I also have God's. So how do my career translate? And I think you guys, you do that here.
I love that juxtaposition. We have jobs and careers, but you're just a pastor. We do real work.
You guys do real.
You said it, not us.
You guys do real work.
I get what you're saying though. Like, that is something that, when you're sitting in the pews and you got to work 40 hours a week and then have your family and do all those things on top of that. And the pastor's like, come on, guys, you need to get out there and use your talents for the gift of God. It's like, well, that's great. But like, I go to a secular job every day. And if I talk about God, I'm going to get fired. Right. Do you see the problem with what I just said though?
Sure. 100%.
Like if I go do this, I'm going to lose what I have. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is that God will not protect me. God will not take care of my family.
Sure.
I have to do it on my own.
Sure.
With the talents that He gave me.
Right.
And or ignore the talents that He gave me in order to live. Right. I think this is something that when God calls you into His kingdom, when you enter the kingdom of heaven, I'm not talking about going to heaven, but when you're in the kingdom of God,
right,
and you're saved, you give your heart to Him. it's not a situation where you just won the lottery and everything's taken care of.
Right.
You're enlisted.
100%.
You know,
yeah.
and you have a calling to do on his behalf.
Right.
Right. And you should have the peace of God and knowing that whatever happens when you go do that, that he is in charge of the return.
Right.
He is in charge of the harvest of that.
Right.
Not you.
Right.
And so you don't have to bury these things out of fear that you're going to lose it all. Because when you bury it out of fear that you lose it all, that's when you lose it all.
100%. Well, and God even gives an out, right? I mean, like, I think this is funny. Like, God says, even if you would put it in the bank, and, you know, the financial advisor whiz over here, you know, he says, like, yeah, the return is low, but, like, let's translate that. If you're one of those people who's saying, like, oh, but, like, I can't, right? I can't, because if I mention Jesus at my work, I'll be like, and then I got a family, I got a house, I got it. You know, if I start talking about Jesus, like, or the way that the pastor's telling me to talk about Jesus, well, that's where God gives you that out and says, well, that's cool. Invest in the church, right? Just so maybe invest in the kingdom here. You know, I mean, in your local church or in another, you know, and he gives you the out of saying, like, you don't have to invest.
You keep saying that.
Creative yourself.
God doesn't give you an out, though,
that's true,
from your calling.
100%.
Right?
Right.
But he may call you to do something other than what he calls somebody else to do.
100%,
So,
yeah.
like, for Tommy, it might be all right for him to just invest his money into the church.
Right.
So that the church can do more with it.
Right.
But somebody in the church is going to have to do something with it.
Right.
And God might be calling me, even though Tommy and I are in the same situations where we work a real job.
Real job, yeah.
You know, God might be calling me and saying, you need to speak up where you're at.
Sure.
Because the people around you don't know who I am.
Right.
And so now I need to go be that voice, be that minister. Or let's just make it simpler.
Start a podcast.
Yeah, start a podcast. God might say, I might be at work one day and God might say, that person over there is struggling financially.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And his tire, this is a true story about him.
Oh, very cool.
And his tire, he just lost his tire and he's freaking out about it. You know, give him money for his tire.
Yeah.
And I had to go, this was Danimal, by the way.
Oh, very cool.
Very
cool.
And so, like, he was near tears at this point.
Sure.
And I walked up to him and was like, here's $100. And he was like, what are you doing this for? I was like, I know that you're stressed, I know that you're this. And at that point, I had to make a conscious decision because it wasn't enough to just give him the $100.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was,
That wasn't the call.
he was like, well, thanks, man. I was like, well, I want you to know that I didn't do this because I wanted to give you $100. Not that I don't want to help you out, but I really believe God wanted me to give this to you because he wanted you to know that he loves you.
Sure. Yeah.
So I hope that you take this and understand that he'll be your provision.
Sure.
And he was
the
like,
why is as important as the what.
100%. Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, he was super gracious about it. Now, I mean, he's gone his own way. He doesn't follow Christ, but he understood what I was saying. He was willing to hear it.
Sure.
I'm not responsible for what he does next.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
You know, I'm only responsible to do what God told me to do. And here's the truth. He could have walked into an office and been like, this dude out here is telling me, is trying to proselytize me while we're on the clock.
Right, yeah.
And I could have got in trouble.
Right.
And potentially terminated. Right.
Right.
And that's the thing that I have to face in my head when that situation arose. So
Then you just take your $100 back. You'd be like, I'll take that back.
I'll
Thanks.
take that back.
Hey, I just lost my job. I'm in a hard job place here. You got $100 you can spare me?
But I have to be willing to say that, you know, God is going to take care of me if that's the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, you don't have, like, there is no, like, you're not allowed, like, there is no out in your calling. Like, that's that, if there was truly an out, you could bury your talent and God wouldn't, there would be no repercussions. But, like, that's not the case. Is that if God calls you to do something, no matter how big or small it is, do it. And I think you just nailed the nail on the head. Let him worry about the consequences.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's so fitting that he said, you know, I did this because I was afraid.
Right.
Because I mean, that's 98% of the reason why people don't do certain things.
Right.
I mean, the number of times that I've been, you know, I feel like God leading me one way or another, and I was afraid of, I didn't do it out of fear because of this, that, or the other thing. You do that out of fear, or you don't do it out of fear, and then but look what you're losing. Look
Right.
what you're missing out on by having that fear.
Well, that's, first you would be afraid, and
Yeah.
then you would be petrified.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Stay along.
Oh, I got it. Yeah. Yep, I got it. Yeah. Ooh, okay.
to change those stupid locks.
What? I will survive. Yeah, that is okay. Yeah, I was like, what is the song, man? I was like, I got the reference, but I could not remember the song. That's right. Yeah.
And I think the important part here is at the end, where in verse 29 it says, "For whoever." So basically, the master, he takes that one bag of gold that he gave to the one guy, and he gave
Right.
it to the one that had the most.
Right.
Which by the way, this is a really small thing, but this shows you how well the master knows his people.
100%.
Because he didn't give it wasn't the guy that he gave 5 that hit it.
Yeah.
He knew that this guy is most likely to do something with this or not doing something. So
He's the closer.
Yeah,
He's the
he-
closer. Yeah.
He gets coffee.
but verse 29 says, "For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even they have, will be taken from them, and throw that worthless service outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." It just shows you that the more that we do with God's gifts, the more He will give us.
Yeah.
And the more that we can do with that, and the more that we can do with that. If we show Him that we can do the little things, He'll give us the big things. Rick Warren's church didn't start with 8 million people in it. It started small, and he led 10 people, and then 20 people, and then 50, and it grew because he was faithful with a little thing, and it just kept
Some could say
growing.
he had a purpose-driven life.
He really did. He really
sure did.
Isn't that sitting right
That's over there. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
He's on the outs now because he went complementarian.
I
Or
know.
no, he went egalitarian.
He did. I know. Those Baptists, they didn't like it.
They did not
I don't
like
know if that's right. Is that where he's from?
It was
Baptist church?
some
Okay.
Baptist convention. Yeah.
Okay.
God bless all of them.
Yeah. That's right.
That's great. But I think what's neat too is it ends the same way that the last parable ended.
Yeah.
Which is essentially to say, if you don't want to, if you're going to choose to not participate in the kingdom, you're going to be thrown out of the kingdom.
Yeah. The punishment is the same as whether you do that or you literally don't, you don't even come prepared. You don't even accept Christ.
Yep.
Your teeth will be gnashed.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's actually a pretty good segue. Mine's not nearly as brutal as yours, but there's actually really
you have a much different temperament.
I'm not as metal. Kind of more like a mellow.
You're way more metal than I am.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm more like easy
we
listening.
kind of have a progression of metal.
Yeah, for sure. That was a little super metal, brutal.
We are sitting in beard
pretty
order
brutal,
here.
pretty brutal, and then not so brutal here. So the one I went with, strangely enough, is in Matthew. So we've gone all through Matthew. There are parables in other parts of the Bible, but Matthew
it does have the most in it. So
it does. The parable that I picked, and it's one I like, and I think it's actually funny because we kind of already started talking about this, so it's kind of cool because we didn't plan this. Is the parable of the sower? It's a very popular parable. I mean, a lot of people have probably heard it. I'll read it. It's Mark 13, or not Mark. This is Matthew 13. I told him it's
He's not
Matthew,
even
and then not
listening
even
to
in the
himself.
right. It's in Matthew 13, and it begins in verse 1, and we're going to go to verse 8. And so here's what it says. It says, "That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and a great crowd gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along a path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds quickly fell on the rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprung up, since they had no depths of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. And yet other seeds still fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. And I kind of like how it does end in verse 9, but he says, he who has ears, let him hear. So I think, there's a lot of ways we can go with this parable. I think a lot of people have probably heard the slant, which is, let's talk about each type of soil that the seed is thrown in, and we can talk about that, but I think kind of along the lines of what we were just talking about, I think there's something really interesting. I like this parable partly because, first off, this is one of Jesus's kind of first forays publicly with parables, and it's kind of the one he starts with. And I think a lot of times we associate this with, we associate we're the soil, right? We're the seed trying to grow in the soil. And so what soil are we in? Are we in good soil? Are we growing? Are we getting choked out by things? But I also think what's kind of interesting about this one is this is the one that Jesus chooses to start with, I think, because he's setting the tone. I think he's setting the tone for his followers. And this is it's kind of the moral of the parable for me, is Jesus... This is about the sower, not about the seed. The sower the sower's the subject. He throws the seed. He's the one doing things. And I think what's so interesting in this is the point of the parable is throw seed.
Yes.
Like we can talk about the soil and I mean, and those are all, parables are great because you can really till, and no pun intended, but you can really till deep into that and kind of get it. But I love this idea of the parable. The moral of the parable is get out there and throw seeds, but not all your seeds that you throw are going to grow. And I think it's interesting based on kind of what we've already been talking about, is I think a lot of times in our Christian faith, and I want to hear your guys' perspectives on this, we don't throw seeds because we judge the soil before we throw it.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, in your guys' personal life, because you guys have real jobs, like how many times do you think, like before you, like, for example, when you said kind of, you're going to get this guy 100, like what went through your mind when you said that? Like, were you just like, okay, cool. Like, I'm just going to throw the seed, or was there, and if you were, hey, great, you're holy. Awesome. But if not, like kind of talk about that a little bit.
Well, this particular guy was a deconstructionist before that was a thing.
Yeah, he was hip.
Like he was one of those early kind of guys that he had been heavy into youth group, but then he went off to college,
right,
and was like, I'm a little too smart for this now. I'm a little too cool for this. Just stop me if this sounds familiar.
Was this me? Did you give me $100?
I gave you $100. No, it was a different guy. Different guy. Kind of goes through that whole phase of, and so then he starts kind of living his life the way he wants to,
right,
which leads to him kind of going in all these other directions.
Right.
And in my mind, he got to a point where he felt like he couldn't turn back at all.
Right.
And maybe he didn't want to turn back at all.
Sure.
But like he really was into what he was into.
Right.
And I'm not going to go too much into those details, but he was a kind guy. He was a nice guy. He was the kind of person that was like, see, this is evidence you can be a good person without Jesus.
Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not what it's about.
Right.
And also you're not as good as you think you are.
Right. Yeah. And where's your definition of good coming from?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got some holes here we need to talk about.
Let's define some terms. So like when that's coming up, here's a guy that I know has Christian experiences.
Right.
Has done some study, although it's probably surface level.
Right.
And has determined that it's folly and that he doesn't want to follow it.
Right.
He's not against me. I know he's not against me for following it, but in my experience is when you confront somebody and say, God told me this or God said this, and they don't believe that God does that.
Right.
It can expose them.
Sure.
And they feel exposed. They feel like you're trying to put them in a position that they don't agree with.
Right.
Oh, I don't need your God's pity, or I don't need this, or I don't, like, whoa. God didn't talk to you about
Sure.
And now, so when I'm walking into that, this is exactly what I'm thinking is I don't want to have a conversation in this back hallway while we're on the clock.
Right.
And we're supposed to be working where I'm trying to defend the faith because I wanted to bless somebody. And it wasn't even me who wanted to do it.
Right. Yeah.
And like, don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't want to bless people.
Sure.
But you have all those things that go through your head. Well, what if I need this $100?
Right. Sure.
And that's my money. I worked for it. Right. I'm a good capitalist. So, right. Like, why should he get it?
Right.
But it's because God wanted him to be blessed in that moment. God wanted that seed to be thrown.
Right.
And so I had to make that choice of like, okay, I'm going to have to trust the Holy Spirit.
Right.
To have this conversation and to do this. And what often would happen in situations like that, because he's not the only person he is the only person I remember giving $100.
I don't remember you throwing hundreds around like that.
I wasn't letting people
I would have stayed there. I would have stayed there much longer if I knew you were tossing hundos out. Yeah.
Next time I have a car problem. But I know
that's right. Yeah.
But there were times where we get into conversations with people who wanted to tell me that they didn't believe in God, and this is why.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And this was where my first like foray into the Council of Nicaea came.
Right. Sure.
Because they had a guy that I was working with there that was like, well, that Constantine just decided the Bible.
He started all this.
Yeah. And like this is all, And what would end up happening is I would have to excuse myself from the conversation and be like, I don't know if this is the right time for this.
Sure.
But maybe later we can connect. Oftentimes they wouldn't want to.
Sure.
I know with that guy, I actually just went and did a bunch of research and came back and like emailed it to him and it's like, hey, you were talking about the Council of Nicaea. I just wanted to set a few things straight, let you know, like this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened.
Right.
So like the things that you said weren't true. I just thought you would want to know for the sake of truth, since that was so important to you.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Kind of thing. But like those were uncomfortable conversations.
Right.
And especially when you have to work with somebody every day.
100%.
You don't want to ruin those relationships.
Right.
And wow, how selfish does that sound? Like I don't want to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Because I had the audacity to tell somebody about salvation or about God or hope for their soul. I would much rather they die and go to hell than be uncomfortable.
Right.
And like, I know how that sounds. You know, I had the youth pastor that used to tell us that our friend's blood was on our hands,
Oh, dang.
Yeah. Like,
well, no wonder you're so metal, bro. Dang, dude.
Right. Which is a very like legalistic thing to say.
Sure.
But like, I get why he said it.
Sure.
As I look back on that, I understand why he went that direction with it, but that like all those things go through your head.
Right. And I think that so often that prevents you from like, or causes you to second guess throwing that seed.
Well, first you become afraid and then you become petrified.
Right. And so I think like, in those cases, like, and I think so many of us, like we judge the soil, and sometimes our judgment of the soil is 100% correct. Like I know I am throwing this on the ground and this soil is going to fall on the cement and the birds are going to take it away.
Yeah.
I know it, but that's not like you read this parable and you're like, man, that sower is like stupid. Like what a wasteful farmer.
Yeah.
But that's not, if we put all of these parables into context, this is a God who wants everyone.
Yes.
And wants to give everyone the chance. Mm-hmm. Now, whether the seed grows or not, it's not up to you. But you still got to throw it. I mean, I know you've probably dealt with this too, because obviously you have a real job as well. But I think that there's like, everybody expects me to throw a seed. Mm-hmm. I'm a pastor. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like they see the seeds coming. Like I'm the seed man,
When people find out what you do, when they're like, so what do you do for a living? You're like, I'm a pastor. It's almost like they put their hands out.
100%.
They put their beer down.
Yeah. No, when they hear I'm a pastor, usually what they do is like, they try to tell me why their soil is not good. Like, they're like, I'm so sorry. Like, I go to church probably once. I know I need to go more. I'm like, like the sower didn't tend to the soil.
Right.
He tended to the seed. And I think though, so people anticipate me throwing them.
That's pretty astute on their part though.
Sure.
If you think about it, they realize that they're not tending to their soil.
Right.
Right. But what they're misunderstanding is they think that makes them unworthy of the seed.
And that's part of the parable is he still throws it. He throws it everywhere. And so, I think in your position, both of you obviously having these real jobs, I would say, let me ask you this question. Do you feel like when God says, hey, say, like, what happens? Like when God says, say this, like, what are your responses? Like, like he said, you sometimes, but have you ever gotten the responses of Tim's parable of like shame and like, oh, I can't believe you like you believe that, or that's like really stupid. Or like, I love people who say like, they go to people and they're like, oh, hey, this sounds crazy, but God told me you just set up that God is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, and I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to soften the like, hey, I know this sounds completely off the wall, but like God told me to do this. And now the person like is like, oh, so you're crazy person. I mean, it's like, what is your experience?
Well, I think you said it best. It's not up to us what happens with it once we plant it.
Right.
Because, I mean, this is kind of a whole topic for a whole other podcast, but it's up to the person to make the decision to give their life to Christ or not.
Right.
You know, I can't get somebody into heaven. They
Right.
have to make that decision for themselves. They have to choose to get baptized. All of that thing.
Right.
And my job is just to show them.
Right.
And you know, if you're talking about relating it to what I do,
Right.
you know, as a financial advisor now, you know, obviously a big part of my job is just getting new clients and bringing in new people.
Sure.
And so there's an element of sales to it. I don't consider myself a salesman, but I did that in my previous job as
Right.
a sport. I sold sporting goods.
Right.
And, you know, one of the things that I learned in that, and I still have to learn, and there's two ways of looking at this. One, if I see somebody that I don't know and I feel like I should ask them, like, hey, do you have a financial advisor? Or have you ever do you have life insurance? Do you have all of these things?
Right.
You know, because when I hear somebody's like, oh, there's certain things that I'm always looking for. Somebody's like, they just got married or they just had kids. Like,
Right, sure.
they need life insurance,
Sure.
you know, because of transition times in their life.
Right.
If you go to a new job, you might have an old 401k that you want to do something, you know, there's things. And so there's always, and so often, and so my job is to ask them, is to put that out there,
Right,
is to kind of take a leap and bring that up.
Right.
And so often I decide not to because I think, well, they're not going to want to.
Right.
They I'm sure they already have an advisor.
Right.
And so basically I turn my own self down before I even give them
Sure.
the opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't give them the opportunity, you know. So the thing that I always have to remember, and the thing that our leaders always tell us, give them the opportunity to turn you down.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and the same thing when I was talking, if I recommend something, or, you know, whether it's, if I look at something and, hey, here you go, and I know it's expensive,
Right.
and I'm worried that there's like, well, it's going to be, and I'm worried that they're probably not going to want to do this because it's too expensive.
Right.
It's still my job to show them. It's still
Right.
I still have to show them and recommend it and whatever. And I have to let them tell me that it's too expensive, or I
Right.
have to let them, because I'm not going to make the sale. I'm not going to do whatever if I don't show it to them, if I
Right.
don't explain it to them, if I don't show them why they need it. And so I have to remember that my job is to go out and to tell people, you know, what it is they need, the benefit that I can bring them, and,
Right.
and the value that I can bring them. And it's up to them to tell me no, you know.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, it's kind of weird, just bear with me here, but it's almost kind of like in this parable, Jesus is almost like having a sales conference with his salesmen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's got his
is.
disciples there, right? And they're all sitting there, and this is one of the early ones where he's standing on a boat and there's a group of people around, and these are his very early followers, and he's kind of telling them the same thing you just said. Let them reject me.
Yeah.
You don't judge them. Mm-hmm. Let them, and I mean, and we can go the whole opposite direction and say, you know, okay, there's different the soil, and what soil are we? Are we the, you know, like I said, and we can go that route, and we can talk about it if we want to. But I love this idea of, I think so often we read this and we fail to see that God is telling us, go out and throw seeds.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. I mean, when it comes to when I'm looking at, you know, setting appointments with new people and new prospects,
Right.
or whatever, you know, a lot of it has to do with over the phone, because they're so regulated in how we do it. And so, you know, I know that if I sit down, I might have to make 40 calls,
Right.
just to set 1 or 2 appointments,
Right.
you know, but I know that if I do that, I'll
Sure.
get that out of it.
Sure.
But I know that I have to scatter that many seeds.
Right.
And I also don't know who's going to answer the phone. I don't know who's going to say yes.
Right.
All I can control is making the call.
Exactly right.
You know, and so they tell us, control what you can control. All I can control is making the call, and if they don't pick up, then I move on to the next one.
Right.
Or if they say no, then I move on to the next one. But if I don't make the call, I'm not going to get the business.
Right.
If you don't tell somebody about Christ, and God has told you to tell them,
Right.
who else is going to? You know,
Right.
there's a reason that God told you to tell them about Christ,
Right.
because there's not somebody after you.
Right,
You know,
right.
or that's part of how God plans it out.
Right.
And they're not going to come to church if you don't invite them.
Right.
They're not going to
Right,
you know,
it's the-
whatever, if you don't tell them.
It's the scripture that says, like, how will they hear if no one preaches? How will
Exactly.
they, you know?
Right. I think one of the things too I think that people fall into this trap of too is they're like, well, did God tell me to tell them specifically?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And did God tell me to tell them this? And I think, like there is some truth in that. Like,
Sure.
God isn't necessarily saying you should be on a street corner every day,
Right.
with the end is nigh sign,
Right.
and
Yeah.
a bullhorn saying repent for the Lord is coming back,
Right.
But He has asked you to be holy as God is holy.
Right.
And Tommy and I talked about this recently. Like when He says that, He says be set apart,
Right.
And like one of the things that's easy to do in that sense is to say, you know what I'm going to do, Brandon? I'm going to show people with the way I live,
Yeah.
how to be the appropriate soil.
Right. Right. Right.
And when they see me be the appropriate soil, they'll come asking for a seed, and they'll want to know what's different
Right.
about you, Brandon.
Right. Right.
Look, there's a kernel of truth in that.
Sure.
And we should be tending to our soil, and we should be. But what oftentimes people do in that situation is that's who they are behind closed doors.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
You're not telling people how you're keeping your
Right.
soil neat and clean when you're out. And
Well, they're
about,
a pot, and they're just
right?
kind of off in the corner. Yeah.
Yeah.
this is
you don't
something-
know how deep that soil
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is something that I struggle with, like consistently. Is people will come and just have conversation with you,
Right.
and my first thought will be something scriptural.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but like, people will ask you, how are you doing? Like, okay, you might find this hard to believe, but I kind of have a shtick. I kind of have a facade of who I am, of being kind of slightly stoic, a little Ron Swanson-ish, I know it's hard to believe, but
A real people pleaser.
right. And it's like, well, things would be fine if people weren't here.
Yeah.
And like I kind of wear them to sleep because you know what, it is funny. It gets a good laugh.
Sure.
You know what? It's not at all godly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like look, I'm not saying don't have a sense of humor,
Sure.
right? But at what point am I going to say, you know what? Honestly, I'm really anxious because my wife lost her job.
Right.
And we're trying to make it financially, but I know that God is going to take care of us.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And like so many times, like that's what comes to mind.
Sure.
And I'd rather go with the joke,
Sure. Yeah.
and like saying the thing about putting my faith in God
Sure.
to get through hard times is not telling somebody they need to repent and come to Jesus.
Right.
But it's showing them that I have peace in difficulty.
It's a seed.
Right. And
Yeah.
that this is how God is helping me overcome anxiety.
Right.
Is by confessing with my mouth in front of strangers,
Right.
or peers who don't believe in God,
Right.
Because I don't have friends, I only have peers,
Right. We know only peers. Only peers.
Only peers.
Sometimes acquaintances.
Sometimes equations, but I'm not willing to do that,
Right.
because then it might open that conversation about
Right.
that uncomfortable conversation about so you believe in, you're one of those,
Right.
And like most people in my life know that I'm a Christian.
Right.
Most people in my life know that I play on the band at church and that I
Sure.
even record a podcast.
Right.
We
Yeah.
share it on my my personal Facebook page.
Sure.
So they have the opportunity to listen to this.
Right.
So they know that I'm doing those things, but like it doesn't make it any less difficult sometimes,
Sure.
because it's that guy that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
When he left the company that we were at, he was like, I'm going to be a pastor. I'm telling some people about it. Please
Yeah.
don't tell people that I'm going to be a pastor, because I don't want to have that conversation with them.
Yep. I remember.
You know, and we've told that story on here before, but like, it's just, I don't want to have that conversation because it makes me feel uncomfortable. Part of it too is it makes me feel incapable. Because I am thinking that it's my talent that's going to do it. I am thinking that it's on me to work out their salvation.
Right.
And if I do this wrong, not only could I lose my job,
Right.
not only could I get in trouble or lose a friend,
Right.
but they may reject Jesus Christ for the rest of their life.
Right.
And I don't want to be the guy that drove them away.
Right.
Right?
And the other thing that I think we often get guilty of is we plant that seed and we want it to germinate immediately.
Right.
And it sometimes some seeds it takes five days before something sprouts
Yeah.
up, and some it takes I mean, years.
Sure.
You know, so kind of an example of this, my dad, several years ago, he planted like 5 redbud trees along his driveway. And they were saplings, so they're like a foot tall. And so he planted them all in the ground, and those things grew like 6 inches in 4 or 5 years. And now they're like 15 feet tall.
Right.
Because they've spent the first 4, 5, 6 years spreading roots.
Right.
They were putting down roots so that when they do start to grow, they have enough foundation to get all the nutrients in the soil that they need.
Right.
And we didn't see that.
Right.
We didn't see all of that that's happening through all that time. But once that foundation was laid, once those roots were spread, man, those things grew like wildfire. But so often we're not patient enough to understand what's going on in the roots, what's going on where we don't see it.
And and it's like Paul says, right? Like, I planted, Apollos water, that whole thing.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think a lot of times too, we look at this metaphor or throwing seeds, and we think we only throw one seed. Like, I'll tell you, like,
Yeah.
like, all right, I threw my one seed and that's it. Like, I think a lot of times, like, how I throw seeds is I throw a ton of seeds. Like, and
More like you're feeding the chickens.
100%. Like, so I planted some grass in my front yard, like grass seed, because I had a couple bare patches, and I threw a ton. I mean, like an absurd amount. Some of it grew, some of it didn't. I still have some bare patches. I had to go back again and throw more seed. And I think like that's part of throwing seeds is it's not a one and done thing. I think what's really funny about this parable is if you really look at it, like from a pragmatic standpoint, where in the world is this sower at? He hits all those soils and he throws. Like, this is like, where is he standing? Like, that is
He's got a good arm.
He's got a great arm. Like, my gosh, like
Nolan Ryan back there.
I know. How is he hitting all of these places? And so, but I think that just goes to show, like, God says, throw it all over the place. Like
absolutely.
Sometimes does that work? Sometimes it's in those kind, and the seed doesn't have to be like you just said, the gospel. I mean, hold on. It does have to be the gospel, but it doesn't have to be. Let me go back. It does have to be the gospel, but not the gospel we think, which is repent, you're going to hell.
Right. It doesn't have to be. Do you have a moment for me to share with you about our Lord and Savior? Yeah.
The good news could simply be that my life is in turmoil right now, but I have peace in God.
Yeah.
That's good news.
That's the one that always gets me. That's the one that always gets me is because people will walk up to me and my everyday and say, "What's the good news, Tim?"
Yeah.
And my immediate thought is, Jesus Christ is King.
You're right. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
That is the good news. And I'm always like, oh,
Right. Well, and I think too, like, that's the other thing about this is I think we also have to be careful and we have to realize this, like Proverbs talks about like, it's not Proverbs. It's oh my gosh, not Song of Solomon. Is it Lamentations? What's the one that there's a season for everything? My gosh, where is that? Ecclesiastes.
Yeah,
Thanks. I knew it was Solomon. I'm like, where is it?
I got to turn, buddy.
Keep going. It's Ecclesiastes, right? There's a season. There's a time to plant. There's a time to, and so I think too, like this is where all of these parables come into play, because when you're living in the Spirit, when you've got the covering of Christ on you and you throw that seed, you don't know what soil you're throwing on. You don't know what's going to happen, but you do know this, that God can do something with it. Yeah. And that's why we throw the seed. And so that's partly why I, like I said, we can go into all of the different types of soil and who those Christians or people are. But like, I love this one because when you really just take Jesus for what he's saying, because he's talking to people who are like, what is he saying? Like he's just telling us to go out and preach.
Isn't this the one? I can never remember which one it is, but there's one where like the apostles are like later they're like, hey, Jesus.
What were you? What did you?
Can you explain that one to us again?
Right. Yes. Right. Yeah. Well, and right after this, he goes. It gives us a whole explanation of like why Jesus teaches the way he teaches, like why parables.
Yeah, that is. So verse 10 says the disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak in the people in these parables?" That's what led to this. This is that one that led to that.
So here's a great question for you, Brandon. As a pastor, do you ever think that maybe we should preach more in parables?
Oh, for sure. For sure. You know, yeah.
Just tell stories and let people figure it out.
Just tell stories and let them figure it out. You know, well, here's the thing. I think we got to be careful of this because I think stories are important. Because someone actually once asked me why I actually use stories when I'm preaching. I'm like, well, because I don't want people just to completely tune out.
Well,
like,
it relates it.
It relates it, right. And
That's what people remember. They're probably not going to remember all, but they'll remember the story. Yeah.
But what Jesus has the benefit of is, and you see this, Jesus constantly relates parables back to Scripture, and we're not talking the New Testament because that's not written yet. He goes all the way back to the Old Testament and the Torah and those, and so I think I think that the funny thing is when we read these, like, think about these 3 parables tonight that we've talked about. Like, a lot of us have heard them, but like, how many of us have actually, like, parables are so deep.
They are.
You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things you can, like, there's so much truth in it that you could just go so many ways. And I think Jesus knew that. Like, we're going to be unpacking these parables until he comes back.
Yep.
That's awesome. You know?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I thought this would be a short episode. But it turned out to be quite a long one.
There's also 3 of us here.
Yeah. But this was fun. Hopefully we can do another one of these similar format where we can have a little bit more organic conversation about what we're
Like
reading in the
Proverbs
Bible.
or something like that.
Yeah, we can do Proverbs next time. There's a joke in there somewhere. It's an inside joke. But for now, I think what we need to do is just let this
Throw some seeds of drums out there, and see what soil it lands in, buddy.
Right. That's exactly it.
That's right.
Exactly it.